My parents ambushed me at family dinner with my pregnant sister, demanding I sign my penthouse over to her for her fresh start. Dad said, "Sign or we'll take you to court." Between my down payment and 36 mortgage payments, I'd invested $287,000. My attorney revealed their $405,000 debt scheme. Their attorney went pale. The invitation came on a Tuesday afternoon. My mother, Patricia, called while I was reviewing quarterly reports at my downtown office, her voice carrying that artificial brightness she reserved for uncomfortable conversations. "Dinner this Friday at the house. Your father insists. Brooke will be there too." Something about the formality made my stomach turn. Patricia rarely called anymore, not since I'd refused to co-sign the loan for Brooke's third failed business venture 18 months ago. My younger sister had a pattern of starting enthusiastic projects that collapsed within months, leaving financial wreckage in their wake. Each time, our parents had bailed her out, draining their retirement accounts while I watched from the sidelines. "I have plans Friday," I lied, shuffling papers on my mahogany desk. "Cancel them. This is important family business." The line went dead before I could respond. I stared at my phone, feeling the familiar knot of obligation tighten in my chest. At 34, I'd built a successful career as a financial analyst, worked 80-hour weeks throughout my 20s, and purchased my penthouse apartment 3 years ago with money I'd saved religiously since college. Every sacrifice had been worth it when I'd signed those closing documents and received my keys. Friday evening arrived with unseasonable cold. I pulled my coat tighter as I approached my childhood home in the suburbs, noting how the paint had started peeling near the garage and the lawn needed attention. My father, Gerald, had always been meticulous about maintenance. This neglect signaled something worse than simple laziness. Brooke's car sat in the driveway, a brand new SUV with temporary plates. I felt my jaw clench. 6 months ago, she'd been crying to our parents about mounting credit card debt. Now she was driving a vehicle that cost more than most people's annual salary. Patricia opened the door before I could knock. Her smile seemed strained, and she avoided meeting my eyes as she ushered me inside. The dining room table was set with our grandmother's china, the pieces we only use for major holidays or significant announcements. "There's my successful daughter," Gerald said from his position at the head of the table. His tone carried an edge I couldn't quite identify. Brooke sat to his right, her hand resting protectively on her stomach. She was showing now, maybe 5 months along. "Congratulations," I offered, gesturing toward her midsection. We hadn't spoken since Christmas, when she'd accused me of flaunting my success by mentioning a work bonus. "Thanks." Her response was clipped. "Twins. Boys." The dinner proceeded with uncomfortable small talk. Patricia brought out roast chicken and vegetables, serving everyone while avoiding substantive conversation. Gerald kept checking his watch. Brooke picked at her food, shooting glances at our parents that seemed coordinated. After dessert, Patricia cleared her throat. "We need to discuss something as a family." Here it comes, I thought. Another bailout request. Another business idea that needed seed money. I prepared my refusal. "Brooke is having twins, as you know," Patricia continued. "She and Travis need more space. Their apartment is barely suitable for one child, let alone two." Travis was Brooke's boyfriend of 2 years, a substitute teacher who spent most of his free time playing video games. I'd met him twice and found him pleasant but utterly directionless. "That's tough," I said carefully. "Have you looked at larger apartments? Maybe something farther from downtown where rent is cheaper?" Brooke's face flushed. "We can't afford rent anywhere decent. Travis's income is inconsistent, and I can't work while I'm high risk. The doctor put me on modified bed rest." "I'm sorry to hear that." I meant it, despite our complicated relationship. Pregnancy complications were serious. Gerald leaned forward, his hands folded on the table. "Which is why we've come up with a solution that benefits everyone. Your penthouse is far too large for one person. 3 bedrooms, 2.5 bathrooms, that beautiful view. Brooke and Travis need that space for their growing family." The words hung in the air like smoke. I must have misheard. "What are you suggesting?" "We're not suggesting anything," Patricia said quickly. "We're telling you what needs to happen. Brooke needs your penthouse. You can find something smaller, more appropriate for a single woman." The absurdity of the statement made me laugh, a sharp bark of disbelief. You're joking. Do we look like we're joking? Gerald's voice hardened. Your sister is pregnant with twins. She needs stability. You've always had everything easy, the good grades, the successful career, the perfect life. For once, you can help family. I'd had everything easy. The statement was so divorced from reality that I couldn't immediately formulate a response. I thought about the scholarship essays I'd written late into the night, the internships I'd worked for free while waitressing on weekends, the student loans I'd paid off ahead of schedule by living in a studio apartment with furniture from thrift stores. I bought that penthouse, I said slowly, fighting to keep my voice level. I saved for the down payment. I make the mortgage payments. It's mine. Technically, it's still the bank's, Brooke interjected. You said yourself you have 27 years left on the mortgage. 27 years that I'm paying for with my income from my job. Gerald reached into a folder beside his plate and withdrew a stack of papers. We've had our attorney draw up transfer documents. You signed the property over to Brooke. In exchange, we forgive the money we spent on your college expenses. You didn't spend money on my college expenses. I had scholarships and loans. We bought your textbooks freshman year, Patricia said. We paid for your meal plan second semester. We covered your car insurance until you graduated. Those expenses add up. I did quick mental math. Even being generous, they might have contributed $8,000 total across 4 years. Meanwhile, they'd given Brooke a car for her 21st birthday, paid for her destination wedding that ended in divorce after 14 months, and funded at least 3 business ventures I knew about. You want me to hand over a property I've invested $157,000 into, over 36 mortgage payments, in exchange for approximately $8,000 in expenses from over a decade ago? It's not about the money, Patricia said. It's about family. About doing what's right. Then do what's right and help Brooke find an affordable apartment within her actual budget. Brooke's eyes filled with tears. She'd always been good at crying on command, a skill she'd perfected in middle school to get out of trouble. I can't believe you're being this selfish. I'm pregnant and scared, and you're talking about property investments like I'm some stranger asking for a handout. You're asking for my home. We're not asking, Gerald said. His face had taken on a florid color I associated with barely controlled anger. We're telling you this is happening. If you refuse to sign voluntarily, we'll take you to court. We've consulted with our attorney, and he assures us we have grounds. The threat landed like a physical blow. Grounds for what exactly? Undue influence, for starters. When you bought the property, you used our address for the initial loan application because your apartment didn't accept mail properly. That makes us partial owners. We're also prepared to demonstrate that we provided significant financial support during your purchase process. This was a lie, a blatant fabrication. I'd used their address for exactly 2 pieces of mail because my apartment building had been renovating the mailroom. The loan approval, the down payment, every single document had my current address and my financial information alone. This is insane. This is family, Patricia said. Sign the papers. I looked at the 3 of them, my parents and sister, united in their delusion that my success was somehow communal property to be redistributed at their whim. The penthouse represented years of sacrifice. Morning commutes before dawn to avoid traffic, lunches packed from home, vacation days spent working remotely because advancement required visibility. I'd earned every square foot. I need to think about it. There's nothing to think about. Gerald pushed the papers across the table. Sign or we file on Monday. I stood, my chair scraping against the hardwood floor. I'm leaving. If you walk out that door without signing, you're choosing property over family, Patricia said. We won't forget that. Good. Remember it clearly. I drove home through blurred streets, angry tears making the traffic lights smear into abstract shapes. My phone buzzed repeatedly with texts from Patricia and Brooke, alternating between guilt trips and threats. I silenced it and focused on breathing. The penthouse felt like sanctuary when I walked through the door. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city, light spreading out like a constellation below. I'd chosen every piece of furniture carefully, saved for the artwork that decorated the walls, planted herbs in the kitchen windowsill that I actually used for cooking. This wasn't just property. This was the life I built when nobody else believed I could. Saturday morning, I called Jessica Cameron, an attorney I'd worked with on corporate contracts. She listened to my explanation without interrupting, occasionally making notes I could hear scratching across paper. "They have absolutely no case," she said when I finished. "Using someone's address for mail doesn't establish ownership. Unless they contributed financially to the down payment or are listed on the deed or mortgage, they have zero legal standing. This is harassment." They seem confident their attorney told them otherwise. Then their attorney is either incompetent or they're lying about what he actually said. Can you forward me any written communication from them? Emails, texts, anything documenting their demands? I scrolled through my silence phone and found dozens of messages. Brooke had sent photos of baby furniture with captions about setting up the nursery in my new place. Patricia had written a long email explaining how disappointed she was in my selfishness, detailing all the ways they'd supported me over the years. Gerald's messages were shorter, blunter threats about seeing me in court. Forwarding now. Jessica was quiet as she presumably reviewed the messages. When she spoke again, her tone had shifted from reassuring to clinical. "I'm going to need you to pull your mortgage documents, closing paperwork, bank statements showing payment history, and any records of financial transactions between you and your parents around the time of purchase. Can you do that?" "Of course. Is something wrong?" "Probably not. But your father mentioned they could demonstrate financial support during the purchase process. I want to make absolutely certain there's nothing they could potentially twist." I spent the weekend organizing documents. My filing system was meticulous, a habit formed during my first accounting job. Every mortgage payment, every property tax installment, every insurance premium was documented and paid from my personal checking account. The down payment had come from my savings, built up over 7 years of aggressive budgeting. The only transaction I found involving my parents was from 4 months before closing. They'd written me a check for $3,000 with birthday written in the memo line. My birthday was in March. The check was dated October. I deposited it without much thought, assuming they'd gotten the months confused. I called Jessica Sunday evening. I found something. A $3,000 check from my parents, dated about 4 months before I closed on the property. What was it for? The memo says birthday, but my birthday is 5 months earlier. I'd forgotten about it entirely until I reviewed my statements. Jessica made a thoughtful sound. Did they mention it being for the house at the time? Never. I actually called to thank them, and my mother said something vague about knowing I'd been saving for something special. Okay. That's potentially problematic, but manageable. They could argue that money went toward your down payment and therefore they have a financial stake. It's weak, but if they get a sympathetic judge, it might muddy the waters enough to cause problems. My stomach dropped. What do I do? First, don't panic. $3,000 on a property you've put $157,000 into is barely a rounding error. Second, I'm going to do some research into your parents' financial situation. If they're making these demands, there's usually an underlying motivation. People don't go nuclear on family for no reason. How would you research their finances? That's what you're paying me for. Let me work. Monday morning brought a certified letter from Kellerman and Associates, attorneys at law. The letterhead was impressive, embossed and heavy. The content was less so. It reiterated my parents' demands, added some legal language about partial ownership and equitable distribution of family assets, and concluded with a deadline. I had 14 days to transfer the property or face litigation. I forwarded it to Jessica and went to work, where I accomplished exactly nothing. My colleague Angela found me staring at my computer screen at lunch, the same spreadsheet open that had been there at 9. "You look terrible," she said, perching on the edge of my desk. "What's going on?" I gave her the abbreviated version. Angela had 2 sisters and understood family dysfunction intimately. She listened with increasingly wide eyes. "They're trying to steal your home." "Legally, apparently. There's no legal about it. That's extortion." She paused. "Have you considered why they're doing this now? Your sister's been pregnant for months. They said she needs space." She needs space, or they need money? The question stopped me. I'd been so focused on defending my property that I hadn't considered what might be driving the demand. Gerald and Patricia had always lived comfortably, Not wealthy but stable. Gerald had worked in manufacturing management before retiring early at 62. Patricia had been a school administrator. I don't know their financial situation. Maybe you should find out. Jessica called that evening with information that made my blood pressure spike. Your parents are in significant debt. I pulled public records. They refinanced their home 18 months ago, taking out equity. They have 3 outstanding credit card judgments totaling $68,000. There's a lien on the property from a settlement with Brooke's second business partner, something about misused investment funds. How much is the lien? $47,000. And that's just what's public record. There are likely additional debts that haven't resulted in legal action yet. I did the math. After the refinance, they owed around $290,000 on the mortgage. Add the judgments and lien, and they were looking at over $400,000 in total debt. Substantially. The house is worth maybe $340,000 in the current market. They owe at least $290,000 on the mortgage after the refinance, plus the lien, plus the judgments. They're looking at foreclosure within the year if they don't get a significant cash infusion. So they want to sell my penthouse? That would be my guess. Your property is worth approximately $650,000 based on comparable sales. You owe around $490,000. If they could somehow force a sale, they'd walk away with enough to clear their debts and maybe have something left over. The scheme crystallized with nauseating clarity. This wasn't about giving Brooke a home. This was about liquidating my asset to solve their financial catastrophe. What do I do? We fight. I'm going to draft a response to their attorney detailing exactly why their claim has no merit. More importantly, I'm going to include the information about their financial situation and make it clear that we understand this is a fraudulent attempt to access your equity. Most attorneys won't pursue a case they know is bogus once they realize opposing counsel has done their homework. And if they do pursue it? Then we go to court and we win. But it won't come to that. Jessica's response letter was a masterpiece of legal writing. It dismantled every argument in the original demand, cited relevant case law, and concluded with a paragraph that made me smile despite the stress. She'd included documentation of my parents' debts and stated plainly that any continued harassment would result in counterclaims for attempted fraud and emotional distress. The response came faster than expected. 5 days after Jessica sent her letter, my mother called. Her voice was different, smaller somehow. You had no right to dig into our private finances. You had no right to try stealing my home. We weren't stealing. We were trying to help Brooke. By committing fraud. Jessica explained what you were actually planning. Sell the penthouse, clear your debts, maybe throw some money at Brooke for appearances. Silence stretched between us. Finally, Patricia spoke again. You don't understand what it's like. We tried so hard to help your sister. Every business, every opportunity, we believed in her. The debts just accumulated. We were desperate. So you decided to sacrifice me to fix your mistakes. It wasn't like that. What was it like then? Explain how demanding I hand over property I've invested years into is anything other than exactly what it looks like. She couldn't. The call ended with vague statements about needing time to think. Gerald called an hour later. His approach was different, aggressive rather than manipulative. You're making a huge mistake. Family is supposed to help each other. Help goes both ways. When have any of you helped me? We raised you. We fed you and clothed you and put a roof over your head for 18 years. That's called being a parent. That's the baseline expectation, not some extraordinary sacrifice that entitles you to my assets decades later. You're being selfish. I'm being reasonable. What's selfish is expecting me to bankrupt myself to bail you out of bad decisions. If you don't help us, we'll lose everything. The words were meant to inspire guilt. Instead, I felt a cold clarity settling over me. That's not my responsibility. You made choices. You enabled Brooke's failures instead of letting her learn from consequences. You refinanced your home instead of budgeting responsibly. You got yourselves into this situation. So you'll just watch us suffer? I'll watch you deal with the natural results of your actions, the same way you've watched me handle my own challenges for years without offering support. Gerald made a sound of disgust. You're not the daughter we raised. No, I'm better. I learned from your mistakes. The call ended with him shouting about lawyers and justice. I blocked the number and poured myself wine. Brooke's approach came via social media. She posted a long, rambling status update about family betrayal, about sisters who valued money over blood, about the pain of facing homelessness while pregnant. She didn't name me, but the context was clear. Mutual acquaintances began sending me screenshots, asking if I was okay. I drafted my own post, detailing the situation without naming anyone. I explained about the penthouse, the demands, the underlying debt scheme. I included photos of Jessica's response letter with sensitive information redacted. The reaction was immediate and overwhelming. People I hadn't spoken to in years reached out to offer support. Several expressed shock at my parents' behavior. Patricia called in tears, demanding I delete the post. "You've humiliated us. You tried to rob me." I'd say we're even. Everyone thinks we're terrible people now. You tried to commit fraud against your own daughter. What did you expect? The following week brought silence. No calls, no texts, no dramatic social media posts. I began to think the situation had resolved itself through sheer exposure. Then Jessica called with news. Their attorney withdrew from the case. What does that mean? It means Kellerman and Associates reviewed the evidence and decided they don't want their name associated with this mess. Attorneys have ethical obligations. Pursuing a frivolous case can result in sanctions. So it's over? Not quite. I want to pursue a restraining order preventing them from making any future claims on your property. It's a protective measure. The hearing for the restraining order was scheduled for a Thursday afternoon. I took the day off work, dressed in my most conservative suit, and met Jessica outside the courthouse. She looked confident, her briefcase organized and her demeanor calm. They'll probably show up, she warned. Are you prepared for that? As prepared as I can be. The courtroom was smaller than I'd expected, wood-paneled and intimate. Gerald, Patricia, and Brooke entered 15 minutes before the hearing, accompanied by a new attorney who looked fresh out of law school. He kept glancing at his notes nervously. The judge was a woman in her 60s with sharp eyes and an efficient manner. She reviewed the filings quickly, then looked up at both parties. Ms. Cameron, your client is seeking a permanent restraining order preventing further claims on her property. Summarize your position. Jessica stood. Your Honor, the respondents attempted to coerce my client into transferring real property through a combination of emotional manipulation and fraudulent legal claims. Despite having no ownership stake in the property, no financial contribution to its purchase, and no legal standing whatsoever, they threatened litigation and engaged in a sustained campaign of harassment. The judge turned to the young attorney. Response? He stood unsteadily. Your Honor, the respondents are the petitioner's parents. They provided financial support throughout her life, including a $3,000 gift shortly before the property purchase. They believe this entitles them to consideration in property decisions affecting family welfare. A gift is not an investment, the judge said flatly. Did your clients contribute to the down payment with explicit understanding of receiving equity? Not explicitly, but did they contribute to mortgage payments? No, Your Honor, but are they listed on the deed or mortgage? No, Your Honor. Then what standing do they have to claim any ownership interest? The attorney shuffled his papers. The gift was substantial and intended for the property purchase. Jessica stood again. Your Honor, if I may. The check in question was dated 5 months after my client's birthday and included birthday in the memo line. My client deposited it as a gift, which is exactly what it was. Furthermore, the respondents are in severe financial distress, including pending foreclosure. Evidence suggests this entire claim was a scheme to force the sale of my client's property to access equity for their own debts. The judge looked at Gerald, Patricia, and Brooke. Is this true? Are you facing foreclosure? Gerald's face had gone red. Patricia stared at her hands. Brooke was crying again, but the judge ignored her tears. Answer the question, the judge said. We have some financial difficulties, Gerald admitted. But that doesn't mean. It means you saw your daughter's property as an asset to be exploited rather than respecting her ownership rights. The judge signed something on her desk. Restraining order granted. The respondents are hereby prohibited from making any claims, written or verbal, regarding ownership or rights to the petitioner's property. They are further ordered to pay the petitioner's attorney fees in the amount of. She looked at Jessica. $12,000, Your Honor. $12,000. Any violation of this order will result in contempt charges. We're done here. The hearing lasted less than 20 minutes. I walked out of the courthouse into afternoon sunshine, feeling lighter than I had in weeks. Jessica squeezed my shoulder. That went exactly as expected. Your parents' attorney looked like he wanted to disappear. What happens now? They pay my fees, they leave you alone, and you live your life. If they violate the order, we go back to court and things get much worse for them. I treated Jessica to an expensive dinner that evening, grateful for her confidence and support. Over wine and pasta, she asked the question I'd been avoiding. Are you okay? I know they're your family. They stopped being my family when they tried to take my home, I said. I'm sad about it, but I'm not conflicted. They made their choice. The attorney fees arrived 6 weeks later via certified check. Jessica deposited it and sent me a final bill showing everything had been covered. Gerald included a note with the check, handwritten on lined paper. You've broken your mother's heart. We hope you're satisfied with your revenge. I didn't respond. Revenge suggested I'd sought to harm them. All I'd done was protect what was mine. Brooke had the twins in late September. Patricia posted photos on social media of 2 tiny boys in matching outfits. I studied the images, looking for any feeling beyond mild curiosity. There was none. These children were strangers, born into a family I no longer belonged to. 4 months after the hearing, Angela found me at work scrolling through real estate listings. Looking for something bigger? Thinking about it. The penthouse is perfect, but maybe I want a guest room. Somewhere friends can actually stay. Friends plural? Does that mean you're dating again? I laughed. Maybe. Eventually. Right now, I'm just enjoying having a home that's actually mine. The listing I've been examining was for a townhouse 10 minutes from my current place. 3 bedrooms, a small yard, recently renovated. The price was higher than I wanted to pay, but I'd been saving the money I wasn't sending to family members in crisis. I scheduled a viewing for the following weekend. The property was beautiful, hardwood floors and granite counters and windows that let in morning light. The real estate agent was enthusiastic, pointing out the updated appliances and the proximity to good schools. Do you have children? She asked. No, but I like options. I made an offer that afternoon. The penthouse would need to sell first, but the market was strong. Jessica reviewed the purchase contract, ensuring everything was legitimate. No hidden ownership claims, no surprise investors, just a straightforward transaction between competent adults. The penthouse sold within 3 weeks of listing, to a young couple who loved the view and didn't mind the mortgage. I walked through the empty rooms one final time before closing, remembering the satisfaction of those first nights spent in a space I'd earned entirely through my own effort. The townhouse closing happened on a Friday in late November. I signed the papers surrounded by professionals who treated the transaction as exactly what it was, a business dealing between equals. No emotional manipulation, no demands for sacrifice, no suggestions that my property was somehow communal. I moved in over Thanksgiving weekend, hiring professionals rather than asking friends for help. It felt important to keep this purchase separate from obligation or debt. Every box I unpacked represented a future I'd secured without compromising my boundaries. Patricia sent a Christmas card that December, addressed to my old apartment. It found me eventually, forwarded through mail services. The message inside was brief and formal, wishing me happiness and health. No mention of the conflict, no acknowledgement of wrongdoing, just pleasantries that meant nothing. I threw it away without responding. The new year arrived with possibilities. I'd been promoted at work, recognition for the focus I'd maintained despite family drama. The townhouse became home slowly, filled with furniture I selected and artwork I commissioned. I adopted a cat from a local shelter, a tabby with an attitude problem who tolerated my presence in exchange for regular feeding. Angela visited in February, walking through the rooms with appreciation. This is incredible. You did all this yourself? Every bit. Your family ever reach out? No. I blocked them after the Christmas card. Better for everyone. Do you miss them? I considered the question honestly. I miss the idea of family. I don't miss them specifically. They never really knew me anyway. In March, on my 35th birthday, I threw a party. Friends from work, neighbors from the townhouse, Jessica and her husband. We ate catered food and drank good wine, and nobody asked me to sacrifice anything. When someone toasted to my success, I raised my glass without the familiar guilt that used to accompany acknowledgement of achievement. To building the life you deserve, Angela said, and we drank to that simple truth. The following week, I received an email from an address I didn't recognize. The subject line read from Brooke. I almost deleted it unread, but curiosity won. The message was surprisingly honest. Brooke wrote that she'd been in therapy, that she'd started to understand how our parents had enabled her failures, that she regretted the attempt to take the penthouse. She didn't ask for forgiveness or reconciliation, just wanted me to know she was working on herself. I appreciated the message but didn't respond. Her growth was commendable, but it didn't obligate me to re-establish contact. Some bridges, once burned, aren't worth rebuilding. Work became my sanctuary during those months of transition. My promotion came with new responsibilities, managing a team of junior analysts who reminded me of my younger self. Ambitious, hungry, willing to sacrifice for advancement. I mentored them carefully, sharing lessons I'd learned about protecting your accomplishments from those who felt entitled to them. One analyst, a woman named Veronica, stayed late one evening asking questions about career trajectory. Eventually, the conversation shifted to something more personal. She mentioned family pressure to leave her job and help with a relative's business venture, something that would derail her career progression. "Do you think I'm being selfish for wanting to stay?" she asked. The question transported me back to that dining room, facing three people who'd weaponized family obligation against my autonomy. I chose my words carefully, aware that my experience could offer guidance without imposing my choices on someone else's situation. Selfish is a word people use when they want something from you that you're not willing to give, I said. The real question is whether helping would be mutually beneficial or just sacrificial. If it destroys what you've built without creating genuine value for anyone, that's not family loyalty. That's martyrdom. Veronica left my office looking thoughtful. 3 weeks later, she mentioned she declined the family request and established clearer boundaries about her availability. Her relief was palpable, and I recognized the particular freedom that comes from choosing yourself without apology. The townhouse neighborhood organized events periodically, block parties and holiday gatherings where residents connected beyond polite waves. I'd avoided them initially, wary of obligation after years of family entanglement. Thomas encouraged me to attend, promising we could leave any time I felt uncomfortable. The spring block party surprised me with its genuine warmth. Neighbors shared food and stories without expectation, creating community through voluntary participation rather than coerced connection. A retired teacher named Dorothy lived 3 houses down and brought homemade bread that tasted like comfort. We talked about gardening and books, simple conversations that required nothing beyond present moment engagement. Walking home that evening, Thomas squeezed my hand. "You're smiling more lately." Really smiling, not just being polite. He was right. The constant vigilance I'd maintained for years, always anticipating the next demand or manipulation, had gradually dissolved. The space where anxiety once lived now held possibility. Summer arrived with heat and possibilities. I started dating someone I met at a work conference, a man named Thomas who managed investments and understood financial independence. We took things slowly, both wary of rushing into complications. On a Saturday in July, Thomas and I were having coffee on my back patio when he asked about my family. I gave him the abbreviated version, expecting the usual discomfort people showed when hearing about estrangement. Instead, he nodded thoughtfully. "My sister tried something similar with my inheritance. Different circumstances, same entitlement." "What did you do?" "Cut her off completely. Some people view your success as something they're owed. You can't maintain relationships built on that foundation." His understanding felt like validation I hadn't known I needed. We talked late into the evening, sharing stories of boundary setting and self-preservation. The townhouse appreciated in value over the following year. I paid extra on the mortgage when bonuses came through, building equity faster than the amortization schedule required. Each payment felt like securing the future my younger self had dreamed about while eating ramen and walking to work to save bus fare. Patricia died in October, suddenly, a heart attack that nobody anticipated. Brooke sent the news via email, including service information. I read it twice, waiting for grief that never arrived. What I felt was closer to melancholy, sadness for what could have been if they'd been different people. I didn't attend the funeral. Brooke sent photos afterward, showing Gerald looking diminished and lost. Part of me wanted to feel sympathy, but I remembered his words at that family dinner, his threats and his entitlement, and felt nothing but relief at the distance between us. Gerald sent a letter 3 weeks later, handwritten on the same lined paper he'd used before. The message was rambling, alternating between accusations and appeals to sentiment. He blamed me for Patricia's death, suggested that the stress of our estrangement had weakened her heart, demanded I reconsider my selfishness. I showed the letter to Jessica, who'll read it with clinical detachment. Do you want to respond? No. He's trying to manipulate me even now. Some people never change. Are you okay? Surprisingly, yes. I spent years thinking I'd feel guilty for establishing boundaries. Instead, I just feel free. Thomas and I got engaged that December, a quiet proposal during a weekend trip to the mountains. We planned a small ceremony, immediate friends only, no dramatic family dynamics to navigate. The simplicity felt luxurious. The wedding happened in April, at a venue overlooking the city. Angela was my maid of honor. Jessica attended with her husband, celebrating alongside colleagues who'd become genuine friends. As I exchanged vows with Thomas, I thought about the penthouse, about that family dinner, about the moment I'd chosen my own welfare over their demands. Standing there in my carefully selected dress, in a venue I'd chosen and paid for myself, I felt no regret. The path had been difficult, isolating at times, but it had led to authenticity. I'd built a life without compromise, surrounded by people who valued me for who I was rather than what I could provide. Gerald sent a card to my old address again, something sentimental about forgiveness and family. It reached me eventually, forwarded through channels. I read it once, noted his continued refusal to acknowledge responsibility, and filed it away with other documents from that period of my life. Brooke sent an email 6 months after the wedding, congratulating me belatedly and sharing updates about the twins. They were walking now, talking, becoming little people. She included photos without asking permission, assuming I'd want to see them. I looked at the images of 2 toddlers who shared my genetics but remained complete strangers. They were cute, as children generally are, but I felt no connection. Brooke had made her choice when she participated in the scheme to take my home. These consequences, however harsh, were earned. Years passed with comfortable predictability. Thomas and I talked about children occasionally but never with urgency. The townhouse became home in ways the penthouse never quite had, rooms filled with shared memories and collaborative decisions. We adopted another cat, this one friendly where the first was aloof, and the dynamic balance worked perfectly. Gerald died when I was 41, another sudden departure that Brooke reported via impersonal email. The funeral information was included, along with a note that I was mentioned in the will. I deleted the message without responding. The will turned out to be surprisingly vindictive. Gerald had left me exactly $1, along with a written statement about my selfishness and my abandonment of family. Brooke received the house, still burdened by debt but hers nonetheless. The attorney reading the will seemed embarrassed by the personal attacks included in the document. I accepted my single dollar with amusement rather than hurt. Gerald had spent his final years clinging to resentment rather than accepting responsibility. That was his choice, his burden to carry. I'd moved on years ago. Thomas asked how I felt, watching me examine the crisp dollar bill later that evening. Relieved, honestly. This feels like closure. Are you sure? Completely. They taught me an important lesson, just not the one they intended. They showed me that family isn't sacred just because of shared blood. It has to be earned through respect and reciprocity. He kissed my forehead. For what it's worth, I'm grateful they were terrible. If they hadn't pushed you away, you might not have been available when we met. The thought made me smile. Adversity had forced growth, pushed me toward self-reliance that became strength rather than isolation. I'd learned to value myself, to defend my boundaries, to build relationships based on mutual respect rather than obligation. The townhouse mortgage reached single digits of years remaining. I'd paid diligently, never missing a payment, building equity that represented security rather than vulnerability. On quiet evenings, I walked through rooms that held no ghosts of manipulation or emotional extortion, just the peaceful accumulation of a life well lived. Brooke sent a final email on my 42nd birthday. She was getting remarried, someone stable this time, a contractor who worked steady hours, and understood financial responsibility. The twins were in school, thriving despite early challenges. She'd gone back to work part-time, something modest that brought in steady income. She wrote that she